ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you please to stand for the Mayor of the City of Clarence, Alderman Dr.
Thank you, everyone, and it's good to see so many people here. I'd like to invite Father Peter to open our session this evening with a prayer. Thank you, Father Peter, from the Lindisfarne Catholic Parish.
Good, thank you. I was reflecting a little bit on, not very philosophically, about time and what time is. Some people say you should live only in the present, but that's fine. We've got to be aware of the present, but we've got to look back to see the good things we've done, to see the mistakes we've made, and we've got to plan for the future. And I guess not too much philosophy tonight, but reminds me of a prayer. Wally and the Major out fishing, 4 of them in a 3-man boat, and it got up very rough. They said, "We're going, we've finished, we've had it. Would someone say a prayer?" And they said, "We don't know any." And of course they said, "Well, someone read through the Bible." So we ain't got one. And then Puddin saved the day, took his hat off reverently and said, "Let's take up a collection." We won't do that, or raise the rates. Anyway, God our Father, we thank you for the many abundant blessings you give us. We thank you for the present as we rejoice in so many things in our municipality. We thank you for the past achievements, and we look forward to a bright future. We pray that you would bless all the members of the council. We pray that you would give them guidance and wisdom, and we'd ask that they'd have the support and the encouragement of all the members of the municipality. We pray that God would bless us abundantly. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. Good.
Before you go, Father Peter, would everyone have a seat, please, just for a moment? It is a very special occasion. Father Peter's been coming along here now for 20 years and coordinating an interfaith group of ministers to ensure that we can open our council meeting with a prayer. But at the end of this month he retires after 52 years of priesthood and 20 years as a Catholic priest in the city of Clarence. It's almost all of Clarence. There's a small part of Richmond there which belongs to another priest, but Father Peter has pretty much most of that time been the sole priest for the whole Catholic congregation in Clarence. He's had 4 schools to look after, a number of nursing homes, and his reach right across the community has been quite extraordinary. In some cases, up to 4 generations of family within one family. So it's been a remarkable journey. He is, of course, known for a sense of humour, and some of his jokes are actually quite good. He's also a keen football follower. The only tragedy is that, along with our general manager, he supports Essendon, but we'll forgive him for that. Also been known to lobby a little bit from time to time. He was pretty keen to get the Alma Street lights, and when it came up on the council agenda, he made sure he was rostered on to say the prayer, and he prayed that all the councillors would see the light.
See the 5-minute speaking.
Anyway, on behalf of Clarence City Council in particular, but also the entire city of Clarence, Father Peter, we'd like to thank you very much for your service and wish you all the best for the retirement. Thank you.
Thank
Please
you very much. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you.
Before proceeding, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and also remind all present that the meeting is being recorded audio-visually and will be available on Council's website later this week. Moving on to item 1, apologies. We have Alderman Dean Newington on leave, and apart from that, all present. Item 2, confirmation of minutes, 2 minutes, for the one for the council meeting on the 3rd of December, and then a special council meeting also on the 3rd of December where we met as a planning authority. The recommendation is that, as circulated, they be taken as read and confirmed. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Thank you. And Alderman Chong, Alderman Kennedy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 3, I'd like to record our farewell to Father Peter and thanks for his service. If we could have that in the minutes, please. Item 4, that Council notes the workshops conducted on the 10th of December and the agenda briefing on the 11th of January this year. Alderman Blomley, thank you. Alderman Edmund, thank you. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Item 6, tabling of petitions. There's none on the agenda. Are there any from Alderman? Item 7 is public question time. There are no matters on notice. Are there any questions from members of the public without notice? Yes, please. Could you come forward one at a time to the microphone just there? General Manager, if you could please identify your name and address.
My name's Joanne Marsh and I live at 32A King Street, Belrive. In 2004,
There's someone knocking at the door.
No, it's not. No, it's something to do with it. It's not a phone.
This is not a conspiracy, Joanne.
I'll try again. In 2014, a regional park sign was erected in Belrive Beach Park and later removed. Council correspondence in 2014 stated that the level of service in the regional park will contain a high level of facility to encourage sustained visit duration. Council correspondence in 2016 stated that changes had recently been made to the parking restrictions in the new car park to prevent long stay parking, which allows for more frequent use of the area. So this is my question. Does Belrive Beach Park currently have regional park status? And if so, why doesn't the parking area provided within the park have the same 4-hour parking allowance as other regional parks in Clarence with restricted parking times? This would encourage sustained visit duration by allowing safer and more convenient access to the park's facilities, particularly for more vulnerable members of the community.
Through Mr Mayor, given the number of matters covered in that question, we'll take that on notice and provide an answer at the next meeting.
Do you need a copy?
Would be good if we could, please. Could you, if someone can collect that.
Thank you.
My name's Peter William McDermott of One Hooky Place in Rugby. Now, I'd like to know Mr Chipman. My question is to you, why am I still being aggravated by a street light on the corner of Hooky Street and Hooky Place? It was taken down by council vote 17 years ago and informed by Jock Campbell it would never go up ever, and to me as well. Many people of influence have informed council on my behalf about the light. The shield was put around the light of hardly any help. I look on this as aggravation and harassment. Ross Graham, I feel, keeps leading me on, and my witness Paul Roach feels the same, and this is my 4th time I've been back tonight.
Thank you, Mr McDermott.
Mr Mayor, we'll provide a full report to council. It was my understanding that a new shield had been installed, and I know Mr Graham went out there and inspected it on at least 2 occasions, but we'll provide a full detailed report to council.
I've still got massive brightness, all coming out of it, on my house and the lawn and all.
Look, council will take your question on notice, and we're all aware of the details and the background to this, Mr McDermott, and we will provide an answer.
I just want to salute Mr. Chicken, where peace of mind and no aggravation for the light or any ad.
Are there any other questions on without notice, please, from members of the public?
I was more than happy to wait, but thank you, Mr Mayor. Before I start with my question, is there any possibility that the layout of this Alderman's seating could be changed? It's very impersonal as far as the gallery is concerned. It's just a question, Mr Mayor.
Yeah, I mean...
it's very hard talking to people's backs.
At this stage, there's no intention of changing layout, Mr
Thank
Bigg.
you. For those aldermen that are here, Happy New Year, and staff, and I hope it's a better one this year.
And the question?
And yes, after pleasantries, sir, I do have a few. The question is, in November we had a question that I posed, put on notice by the General Manager, and that was in relation to Woolworths at Lauderdale, if you remember that, Mr GM, and you were going to get back to us. Can you please let us know what the answer to that is?
I thought I provided an answer on the night, but I will check the record, and if I didn't, I will convey an answer to you. But I can answer the question to the extent that at this point in time there is no, whilst there's permits in place, there is no proposal that we've seen that would indicate that there's anything going to be developed certainly within the next few months.
Yeah, in the minutes it states that you were going to contact Woolworths and see where the situation was at.
Certainly we have spoken with them subsequent to that, and my understanding, as I just outlined, is there is no, whilst there is permits in place, there is no proposal, as we understand it, to proceed at this time that we're aware of.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr Figg. I'm sorry, if you've got any other questions, can you please submit them to us under the meeting regs? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Are there any other questions from members of the public on notice? Without notice? Thank you. Item 8, deputations by members of the public. General Manager.
Yes, Mr Mayor, we have 3 deputations this evening. The first is Mr Terry Kavanagh of Tranmere, who wishes to address Council in relation to a development application at 10 Yachtsman's Way, Tranmere. You can come forward, please.
While you're coming forward, I do need to remind all speakers that there's only an opportunity for 3 minutes, and there'll be a tone at 30 seconds to go.
Just in relation to that, Mayor, I do represent 3 respondents who decided we would put it together rather than take 9 minutes. So maybe you could be just a little bit. It goes over 3 minutes just.
Look, I don't have that discretion. Thank you.
I'm Terry Kavanagh, and the respondents back onto planning 10 Yachtsman's Way, D 2018-631. I represent 3 respondents. In the papers you have, in response to the Yachtsman's Way development, under planning requirements, page 40 of your papers, it refers to requirements relating to setbacks and building envelope. Your papers state clearly that the plans submitted are non-compliant with clause 10.4 of the building code. The diagrams submitted by the developer show that the required 45-degree angle is not complied with, and that the decks and large windows overlooking our property are outside the permitted envelope. Despite stating that the proposed plans are non-compliant, no remedy is proposed. Therefore, the proposal fails and must be refused. Privacy. Your papers claim that the development is largely oriented to the west, which leads them to dismiss the issues of privacy. Strangely, there are considerable window and deck spaces to the north. We will look into the rooms of these units from a much higher location. The northern aspects of the units will overlook our back garden from a greater height and outside the permitted envelope. You will also note that Mr Kerry Cranfield at 11 Anchorage has raised concerns with the validity of the builder's own shadow documents. Drainage and stormwater. It's claimed that adequate stormwater drainage exists. It exists because there is a stormwater drain flowing from east of Oceana Drive and Pipe Street runoff. It's impossible for the water that flows west of Oceana Drive to get into that stormwater drain. It's not pervious, it is impervious, and the area is base soil of solid black clay. We all watch water flow merrily across that area as soon as it rains. stop in various spots down the way and then end up in a gully, which your staff have this week actually put a bridge across in your pathway development because the gully is so deep. It's our contention that that water will be exacerbated by the developments proposed, and that we will get it along our fence lines, which has already been experienced next door to us and replaced by a Taswater expense. And we will get that issue on our fence lines, and you will, as council, get that issue on the work that you've just put in on the foreshore. I don't think you want to do the extra cost of that. Permitted use and discretionary use. Well, the document says that this is done under discretionary use, and then says basically there's no discretion. That's a ridiculous statement. If you have a discretionary use, you must have some discretion one way or the other. Finally, some points of order. We were not told that this meeting existed or that the documents would be available here. We were lucky enough to speak to two aldermen, and they told us. Paper at 3.2, the document refers to a place called Coventry Rise, which is 3 kilometres away from us, and obviously irrelevant.
But look, I am happy to cut you off there. It is possible, if you want, to circulate your last few points around and make sure.
I think I've supplied a copy for everyone.
Okay.
And the last 3 points, the last points are really relevant, and certainly in conclusion, we would like you to consider the options as to how you treat this development.
Look, you're not helping your case. I'm sorry, I can't give you more time.
It's just pointing out what the paper was.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr Philip Adams of South Arm, who wishes to address council in relation to development application 455 of 2018.
Right to go. Good evening, Mayor and Alderman. My name's Philip Adams, and I'm currently residing at Half Moon Bay, South Arm. I'd like to speak about the current proposal for a sewage pump station and treatment plant outside the place at Half Moon Bay. As a facilities manager for the CSIRO in Hobart and Queensland, I have an experience with industrial scale hydraulic infrastructure and maintenance. Let me be very clear at this point that I have absolutely no problems with the golf course or the use of recycled water. However, I do have a problem with proposal that puts financial gain ahead of safe design, bad design I should say, and public safety. The council has before it an application for a reuse pipeline from Blackmans Bay to the golf course. This application is full of inconsistencies, errors and missing critical documents. I believe that these and a lack of specific engineering detail is a deliberate attempt to downplay the size of the Half Moon Bay pump station. And for a comparison, Barnbougle, a similar links course in the north of the state, receives 30% more rainfall than Arm End and still uses 2 megalitres per day. Barnbougle is a mature golf course. If it was starting up, it would probably use about 6 megalitres per day. From the limited and inconsistent information provided, the proposed Half Moon pump station would, I believe, have a capacity for pumping 4 to 5 million litres per day and include treatment systems that have not been identified in the application. This will be an industrial-sized pump station and treatment plant that accurate drawings and risk assessments will identify. I believe it would be completely inappropriate for the council to place this infrastructure in a small community next to a busy, dangerous road. The Monada Street pump station, I believe, is a more accurate example of the likely reality of the proposal. As a facilities manager, I was required to have an understanding of OHS&E law and how it pertained to my responsibilities. The law is not concerned with politics or commercial gain or a lack of resources. It's concerned about who has duty of care, who fails that duty and who pays. If the council were to approve this application as it stands, it would be approving a project for an unknown quantity of Class B sewage, potentially fatal as an airborne pathogen, to be pumped through 2 local communities through an unknown amount of infrastructure with no idea of the risks involved. I believe this would leave the council exposed to liability and the community to unquantified risk. Please also keep in mind that during the new year, Taswater pumped 10 million litres of unchlorinated Class C water into the river. Luckily, it wasn't going to an onshore pump reuse system, and this is not the first time. To enable community confidence in the approval of this development, there needs to be an independent risk assessment of the physical, chemical, biological and social hazards, including the scenarios under which these hazards occur, and based on a fully engineered design, including Taswater section of the supply, prior to approval. The safe solution is to directly pump from Blackman's Bay to the golf course, as mentioned within the application. If done, all these other issues disappear. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr Mayor, is Melissa Fraser from the Tasmanian Dog Walking Club, who wishes to address Council in relation to a notice of motion on the agenda this evening.
Mr Mayor, Alderman and staff, thank you for the opportunity to speak to Alderman James Walker's motion calling for a state-of-the-art dog park within Clarence. My name is Melissa Fraser. As President of the Tasmanian Dog Walking Clubs and Vice President of the Hobart Dog Walking Association, I support James Walker's motion. To date, there is one small, fully fenced off-lead area in Clarence, the South Street Reserve. This is actually a shared facility, as it is also used as overflow car parking for the Blunston Arena. The weight of the cars causes compaction of the soil and grass struggles to grow, leaving a rather uninviting arid wasteland. As it is the only fenced space, it is susceptible to overuse, causing issues with conflict between both dogs and owners. With the continued growth and urbanisation of Clarence and the associated increase in dog numbers, it makes sense to plan for the future and start to develop plans for at least one substantial dog park. There are articles stating that dog owners will move to areas where dogs are catered for. Just over 40% of Tasmanians own at least one dog. By agreeing tonight to build a dog park, budgets can be developed and appropriate land selected and set aside. Fully fenced dog parks provide safe spaces for dogs to run off stress and socialise. Happy, fulfilled dogs are calmer and less likely to be a nuisance. Dog parks can help build a community of dog owners, providing support for each other as well as companionship. The John Turnbull Dog Park community in Hobart is an example of this, and their Facebook page recently hit 1,000 members. The counters on the gates at John Turnbull recorded 6,537 people accessing the park for the month of October alone last year. Some of these dog owners are from Clarence. People are accessing the park 24 hours a day. Spaces like John Turnbull give dog owners the ability to practice recall safely. Good recall is essential for the safety and benefit of the dog, the owner and the community. It is one of the core components of responsible dog ownership. Dog parks are a space where dog owners and council can build a positive and rewarding partnership. They can be a place where information can be shared and education can take place. Importantly, they provide space for dogs to be dogs, when perhaps us humans expect and demand too much of them. Again, I thank Council for the opportunity to support this motion and hope that you will see this motion as a positive step forward for the Clarence community. Thank you.
No more speakers, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, General Manager. Moving on to item 9, motions on notice. 9.1, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would move the motion standing in my name when I find it.
We have a second.
There was discussion at Friday's briefing there would be additions to the motion on notice. In other words, there was to be another clause added to the motion, and I believe that...
Well, it hasn't been tabled or circulated as far as I'm aware.
I was about to say when I found the motion that I was going to read the one that I had circulated by email to you. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have been circulated to here. Remember I sent you an email on Friday after the briefing?
Yeah, I didn't realise that I was expected to circulate it further.
No, but the General Manager was drop copied on and I thought he might have done so, but obviously that hasn't happened. Can I...
Mr Mayor, could that be circulated now, because there's some important points that need to be made under para D?
Well, I'm not sure how we go about this. We've got a motion that's on the agenda. We've got a mover. Is there a seconder? Perhaps Alderman Mulder, that you might like to consider it for the next council meeting in this case?
Yeah, I'm happy to actually defer it, pending the circulation of those other
I think, to be fair to the councillors, they need an opportunity to actually be able to read it and think about it. So,
I'll refer it to a following meeting.
thank you. Item 9.2, notice of motion, Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll read the motion and await a seconder. That the General Manager provides a report on options for the establishment of a state-of-the-art dog park within Clarence. Such report should canvass options and costings for the establishment of a new park and for the upgrade of the existing South Street Dog Park, and be presented to Council in a time frame to enable consideration of such facility in the 1920 Council budget.
Have a seconder, please. Thank you. Take Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you. Look, I could probably just say refer to Melissa Fraser's deputisation, because I certainly agree with it. Currently we have around 10,000 registered dogs in Clarence, with only the one enclosed facility, and it's not fully available all the time. It is also somewhat lacking. One of the most fundamentals that I'd point out is the lack of a double entry gate, which just is a concern for owners and users, that a gate will be left open and a dog will make an escape. It's important to note that as far as informal recreation or exercise, when it comes to dog walking and exercise, this is a user group that isn't just contributing through their rates, but also through their dog registration fees. There is overuse and unmet demand for dog parks, but moreover well-designed facilities rather than just a fenced-off green area. State-of-the-art dog parks benefit all residents with or without dogs. Exercised and stimulated dogs are less likely to cause problems such as excessive barking. They allow the frail or those with prams to exercise their dogs in a safe and secure way. When you look at the infrastructure characteristics, they are not overly resource intensive. And also, we are fortunate to have on council some staff who were heavily involved, or who was rather heavily involved in the John Turnbull state-of-the-art dog park that was built in Hobart City Council. So if you like, within our council we have in-house skills to go through the design process. There are also now multiple design resources that weren't in place 5 or more years ago. The excellent guide unleashed by the South Australian Government on good dog park design is probably top of the pile. There's also others like that from Maitland Council, and even I think it might have been Bob Holden's Rodham that's designed one a guide in Tasmania as well. So again, some of the characteristics that separate a state-of-the-art dog park from, if you like, just the plain singly fenced green area is plenty of space allowing for the dog to roam, challenges so that dogs can exercise their body and their brain, different surfaces like fields, gentle hills, clumps of rocks, or level fields I should say, logs and tunnels, and special or smaller use areas for older and shyer dogs. If successful, this motion will facilitate a park in the sense of identifying a location and giving us costings and designs. Naturally, it would still be coming before us as a council to deliberate and sign off on. I seek council support.
Just very quickly, just endorse everything Alderman Walker just said and congratulate him on formulating this idea before the last election, taking it to the community and getting support.
To reply. The motion before the chair is as proposed by Alderman Walker. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10, 10.1, reports from single and joint authorities. The reports are there for the September quarterly report for the Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority, the summary report for the Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority, and there's nothing to report under the Tasmanian Water Corporation. Are there any questions on those reports?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I particularly note the reports once again. The Southern Tasmanian Council Authority, we get a quarterly report to members that tells us that Mr Tay, the Director of Local Government, provided an update on the Local Government Board review of voluntary amalgamations and shared services options, also on the review of the Local Government Act 1983 and amendments to the Local Government Amendment Miscellaneous Bill 2018. So those three, amongst others, would be really helpful if some of these reports, which are for public information, were actually to contain the content of those briefings rather than just the fact that the briefing was had, unless of course there's something super secret about all those things that we shouldn't do. So I would really appreciate, as our representative, Mr Mayor, if you would like to give us an outline of the progress of those three very, very significant projects.
Thanks, Alderman Mulder. I might add that also tabled shortly after, before the elections, were the minutes from those particular meetings, which expanded further on what those items mentioned in the quarterly report were. But it did happen back in August, and I would like to invite the General Manager to update us on those three things so that Council is fully informed this year.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, the presentation by Alex Tay, the Director of Local Government, essentially just provided a situation update on each of the amalgamation studies that have been commissioned. Clearly, we're fully aware of those that related to Clarence, where they were at. He also talked about the study that was being undertaken at the time between West Tamar and Georgetown and how that had not led to any amalgamation. He also talked about the shared services studies that had been undertaken primarily in the north of the state. Essentially what he was saying was that his department, and he was encouraging the councils, was to ensure that any lessons that had been learnt as a result of those studies being undertaken weren't just lost, that anything that was progressive or that could be implemented by councils, particularly around the issues of shared services and working more closely with neighbouring councils, were encouraging the councils essentially to keep going with those processes. So that was in essence that. In relation to the review of the Local Government Act, he just outlined the process that was expected to get underway, that is now in fact underway, and that's a review of the Local Government Act. In fact, there's a consultation draft out for consultation with councils at the moment, with submissions due by the 1st of March, so he just gave a preliminary update in relation to that. Memory serves me correctly, the amendments to the Local Government Act were primarily around electoral matters, in particular in relation to expenditure levels and signage and things of that nature, which were you might recollect, there were a number of relatively minor amendments that were sort of, I won't say rushed through, but brought through towards the end of or just in time for the electoral process. And the Code of Conduct was really about advising that the Code of Conduct had essentially been finalised and was waiting to go through the various approvals. It's my understanding, or not my understanding, it is the case that that Code of Conduct has now been signed off by the government, and a report in respect to that will be brought to council shortly. I'm happy to provide any further detail in relation to any of those matters if needed.
Thanks. Any other questions? Alderman Walker?
Yes, again in relation to the STCA, it is again my understanding that March is the cut-off deadline for any council wishing to leave STCA. Is this council going to be holding a workshop on this prior to that month?
It's certainly my intention to come forward, give council the opportunity to discuss the matter, probably at a workshop towards the end, I was going to say that I've got to be careful of the date because it'll be the Tuesday, not the Monday night, 28th of January I think it is, or I think it's the Tuesday night. Might be the 29th, I'm not sure. 29th, yeah.
And are you aware of any other southern councils that have given formal notice to leave the organisation? And is it likely to be called the Some Southern Councils of Tasmania Authority when that occurs?
My understanding is that no council has yet given any formal notice at all. Kingborough and Glenorchy have been considering, but I don't think they've resolved. Any other questions on those reports? Okay, moving on to 10.2, reports from councils and special committees and other representative bodies. None in the agenda. Are there any from the floor, please? Thank you. Item 11, reports of officers. 11.1, the recommendation is that the information contained in the weekly briefing reports of the 3rd, 10th, 17th of December and the 7th of January be noted. If I could have a mover and a seconder there. Alderman Blomley, Alderman Pears, Alderman James.
Yes, thanks, Mr Chairman. My question is in relation to the weekly briefing report of the 17th of December. and Roaches Beach access ramp on page 6. Mr Mayor, it refers to, amongst other things, that on the 13th of December, Mr Graham, Group Manager Engineering Services, in his last paragraph said it's expected that works will start in the new year with an approximately 5-week construction period, weather dependent. The timing of the works will be confirmed once a construction program is received. My question through you to Mr Graham is that this letter, or this memorandum, is dated the 13th of December and work is expected to start in the new year. Can you provide council with the date that work will be completed and when people will have the access to the beach as they had access prior to it being closed early in, I think it was January 2017?
Through Mr Mayor, the contractor started work today. We're still looking to receive their final construction program. It depends on the delivery of the flex map, and I will provide a briefing to Bill once I find out the program.
Thank you. My second matter is in relation to the weekly briefing report of the 7th of January 2019, the South Arms Skate Park on page 5. Mr Mayor, in the condition that the tribunal actually handed down, amongst other things, in the determination of the appeal, it says, and I quote, if the noise levels, and I quote, if the noise levels exceed the mean 70 decibels and 57 decibels and leg, I don't know what that means, but anyway, then noise attenuation measures to reduce emissions to achieve compliance with the above threshold are to be determined by a suitably qualified person and implemented to the satisfaction of the council's senior engineer. If, in the situation, I know it's an if in fact the noise levels in fact do exceed those, is there any contingency plan by council to spend ratepayers' monies to construct a wall in order to minimise and obviously reduce the impact on adjoining properties?
Through Mr Mayor, will be dependent upon expert advice in terms of the noise levels and recommendations or options in terms of how the council proceed.
Supplementary. Is there any money set aside for the construction of the attenuation wall?
Through Mr Mayor, there's no specific money set aside. There is money identified by council for several stages of the master plan, and should that proceed, it may extend out depending upon further budget approvals by council. Please feel free to ask. Are there any other questions about the
Briefing reports. Okay, so I'll put the motion that the information contained in them be received and noted. All those in favour? Carried. Against? Carried. Item 11.2, determination of petitions tabled at previous council meetings. 11.2.1, Norma Street, Howrah. If I could have a mover and a seconder there, that council notes the intent of the petition, goes ahead with a special purpose centre line, and the General Manager advises the petitioners. Thanks, Alderman Pearce.
No, Mayor, I'd like to move an amendment there that Part B to this motion, Part B, that the centre line special purpose not be installed on the bend of Norma Street from 37
okay, do we
to
have
40.
a second of that motion that's been moved by Alderman Pearce?
Be voting against it. Rather
alternative motion, that's right. It is indeed an alternative motion, but it's a motion that's now been moved by Alderman Pearce. Is there a seconder? There being none, is anyone prepared to move the officer's recommendation? Alderman James. Thank you. Is there a seconder for the officer's recommendation?
I'll second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman von Berto. Do you wish to speak to it, Alderman James?
No, Mr Mayor. Goodness me.
Alderman von Berto.
No,
We've debated this.
Order, please, Alderman Blomley. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Why I moved that motion, Mayor, that we had a petition containing 28 signatures that did not want this to go ahead. The proposed traffic calm and yellow line between 37 and 47 Norma Street not go ahead. I went and met with some of the residents up there, and I can certainly understand why they're not in favour of this. And when I looked at this, we're sort of picking one street out. I mean, you could put yellow lines on every street in Clarence, really, but when the residents themselves in this area, and it affects 6 houses, and 6 houses out of 6 said, no, they do not want support. So I'm actually against this motion, Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
I'm sort of know where Alderman Pearce is coming from, but then we've also had other residents in the area who wanted us to put no parking signs on there, and that met with some resistance as well. So it's a little bit of do what you can. I mean, I'm a little bit reluctant to say, well, we'll paint a little white line on this area, because the same situation is throughout the city. You know, we want to get in the habit of doing it. But on this particular angle, I've been there and I've had a look at it, and although I wasn't particularly persuaded by the officer's arguments on Friday at the briefing session, I did go up and have a look at it, drove through the area, and although there were no cars parked there at the time, had there been one, I would have seen that your natural instinct to just go past it, you might have been deterred and made to think twice by the existence of a centre line, which would just say, just take another look before you dive in. Now, I'm not hugely, you know, impressed with that, but put it this way, I don't think it can hurt in that particular spot.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, it does depend on, I guess, cars parked there and whether a bus is coming in the other direction. It's a classic case of the sausage being made in the local government area. It's not a pleasant thing to watch. This is sort of the most elegant outcome we can come to. It's not perfect, but neither are the other ones.
Speakers? Right reply, Alderman James.
Compromise, Mr Mayor. Seek council support.
The motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? Against? Carried. I'd now like to advise that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. Item 11.3.1 is a development application at 10 Yachtsman's Way, Tranmere, for 2 multiple dwellings. Do we have a move and a seconder, please?
Officer's recommendation.
Have a seconder? I do advise that if this motion lapses one way or the other, that it's a deemed approval, and council are up for a fair bit of expense for the tribunal to make a decision on this.
Make a decision.
Hmm?
If we don't make a decision.
If we don't make a decision, yeah.
That,
I've got a mover. I'm just calling for a seconder.
I beg your pardon.
There being no seconder, Alderman James.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move that the development application at 2018/631 at 10 Yachts Way be refused for the following reasons. That the have a look at the page. That the actual the angle projected line and angle of the actual horizontal at the height of the 3 metre natural ground level, and it's not in accordance with the
I think
10.4. I might need a couple of minutes.
Okay, so with leave the meeting.
Mr Mayor, if I can say something second, we haven't had a motion. There's no motion before the Chair.
Well, we haven't.
Alderman Mulder moves his motion, I'll second it.
Okay, well, I'll, in the absence that we've progressed on Alderman James, he might like to do some work on that. I'll accept Alderman Mulder's move and seconded by Alderman Blomley. Thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Yes, I move the officer's recommendation. Can I start saying that I do it reluctantly, and I think people around here know that I'm not a great favour of this infill development, this unit thing. I also know that we don't have a great deal of choice on these things, and I'm somewhat surprised that if there were some really valid planning grounds for not allowing this, and I for one would love to find them, and we've got a few issues, but why weren't they raised at the Friday workshop so that we could have had a discussion, we could have had some idea about what we were coming in here to do? And I'm just surprised that it took some time and a retake and maybe a breach of procedure to actually get it seconded. So I'm just, I'm a bit sneaky. Let me get to the point. I don't like these sorts of, I think there's an excessive use of units in this infill development. This infill is, it's basically destroying the old backyard that most of us grew up in, so heavens knows where we're going to get, where the recovery for Australian cricket will ever come in if kids can't play the Christmas Day test in backyards. We've had governments of all persuasions and parties all along the line of saying this was a really good idea that we crowd out these areas of land, so it's not a part of political thing. We all seem to be in unison that this is a great idea. There was a time Clarence had a planning scheme where we used to limit the amount of dwellings within a 300-metre radius or something, which seemed to work as a pretty good break on excessive numbers of units. Here we have at Yachtsman's Way, 2 of them next to each other. There's a development application in the pipeline right next door by the same developer for the same units, both 2 units once again squeezed on almost the minimum size lot that you could fit them in with things. So I don't like it, but that's not what I'm here for. I'm a planning authority. I'm here to give effect to a ministerial direction, which is what our planning scheme is. This is an instrument of the Minister. It has never been before Parliament. It is not a regulation. It is not a disallowable instrument. It is by ministerial direction. And here we sit as councillors with no option but to really put through these ministerial policy directions and take the political heat off the government and put it on our own heads. The issue, and I've had a look and I've had the officers comment on some of the submissions that have been made to us, and although, as I said, I'm in sympathy. The one that got me was mainly the one about the watercourse. And I've since been back to and had the officers assure me that there's been substantial works there. I have a letter to that effect. Substantial drainage works were constructed at the time of the subdivision, and that the easement runs through the rear of the current site. I, for one, thought it was pretty poor urban design, where you have watercourses running down the side of hills, where we have skyline trails and foreshore trails, and here we have these watercourses that are subject to inundation, that are natural drainage areas, that would make perfect linkages between shoreline and skyline trails. And what do? We build houses on them. We build play parks on them. We do all those sorts of things. And for the water that doesn't make it into the pipe, it falls on those land, and when you get your sudden downpour, that will be a soggy backyard. And it won't interfere with the cricket because there's not enough room for a pitch. So I really don't like those things, but the fact is that I've listened to the arguments and I've had some comment on them, and I don't think those arguments are of sufficient standard to vote it down and put ourselves before the Commission as a council, recommending against the planning experts' interpretation of this ministerial directive and subjecting us to this. It's really a case where we ought to be going back to the government and saying the community does not like this building of units right across the board, and get a change to the planning directive. That's the only way we are going to get away from this. And so that's about the only avenue that I can really see and the substantial ground that I can see. And we need to look at this in the subdivisions. And I know further along there are there's an outline development plan, and I would really like the people who are subdividing that to take on board some of these issues so that we don't end up with Droopy Point, chock-a-block full of houses made of ticky-tacky, and they all look the same.
No, Mr. Mayor.
Other speakers?
I find myself torn on this one. Alderman Mulder makes some good points about we have very little room to move, and I also endorse his point that where we should be moving is pushing it back against the planning scheme. But I find this a strange one because if the property in Anchorage Court was being before us as a development application, we'd be complaining about the overshadowing of the property in Yachtsman's Way. Instead, we have a developer planning or choosing to propose a development in Yachtsman's Way where the majority of the living area faces north, which is directly into the backyard of the property, whereas the view is to the west. And the sunlight is obviously to the north, and that's going to be blocked. It seems like this design is designed purely for profit rather than for livability. The watercourse is a major concern. I think that regardless of the work that may have been done in the past, the observations of the neighbours that the water does run down there is again going to be an issue for the developer and perhaps potentially for the council, a cost to the council. So by approving this, we put ourselves at risk of having to do remediation work further down the track. The fact that the properties in Anchorage Court were subject to a covenant which didn't allow them to have dwellings on their properties, and there's no such covenant on the new blocks, even though they're owned by the same developer or the brother of the developer, I understand, is grossly unfair, but there's nothing we can do about that. So I find myself conflicted on this. I would seriously like to vote against it. I feel that the overshadowing and the invasion of privacy in the backyard of the neighbouring properties is a significant issue that hasn't been fully addressed. I think there'll have to be some significant privacy screens put in so that the neighbours can enjoy relaxation in their backyards without being overlooked by these new developments. But I guess my underlying thought is that if the developer wants to build an ugly building facing into the neighbour's property with a possible watercourse running through the parking area, then that's the developer's choice, and unfortunately the planning scheme doesn't give us much room to move on this one.
Alderman Mulder.
I think there's a great deal to reply to, except I guess that the point is that the substantial drainage works that were carried out in that area under the Urban Drainage Act, and I'll be asking a question about this later on in respect to another area, but council is required to produce adequate drainage stories, those things. So although if we hear the word substantial drainage works were done in recent times when the subdivision occurred, then I think we've got to accept the fact that they are adequate drainage to carry the runoff from the other, and each of the properties as they are gradually developed will of course also have to have their own to capture their own groundwater, and that will be funneling in. So although for a while there will be a fair bit of water coming over, as the other units are developed, they will have their own agricultural drains and taking stormwater and channeling it into this thing. So the issue should exacerbate itself. My point about the watercourse was more, this is a great opportunity to create public open space, access between council reserves, and do some interesting things like build the odd park or two along some of the flatter areas that we could do, so children or dog parks I suppose. But it's really an issue of that I like you, don't like it. I think we've got too many units, and as I said before, they're all ticky-tacky made the same, but our hands are severely tied on these.
The motion before the Chair is approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Item 11.3.2 is a development application at 26 Sugarloaf Road, Risdale, for a change of rooms and public toilets. Thanks, Alderman Pears. Do we have a seconder for this? Alderman Walker? Sorry.
That's right. Go.
Alderman Pears, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this is badly needed. We had a budget bus tour on this. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. And these conditions over there, these change rooms, are absolutely appalling. And I think this new facility is extremely good. I see it's got a bit of storage too, which will certainly be needed in that area. And look, it really will give the area a lift. I mean, what's there at the moment certainly does not compile with anything. So I'm really pleased that we've made this decision to go ahead with these.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Look, it's important to note that this was just a component of the plan we have for the area, and yes, it is useful, and it will augment with the other things we're doing to add value and enliven an activity in this space. It is an underutilised oval and an underutilised area, so bringing this forward is good. It might be a year or two later than some had originally envisaged, but the fact of the matter is this is happening as part of a bigger, wider enhancement, so in that sense it's worth the wait.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Pears.
The good part about this is because this is being done, there are clubs now that are showing an interest in using this ground, so I'm really pleased about that.
Noted your new material there, Alderman Pears. The motion before the Chair is recommending approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.3 is a subdivision application at 25 Tulloon Street, Lindisfarne, with access over 25A Tulloon Street for a two-lot subdivision. Alderman Blomley. Oh, seconded Alderman Chong. Alderman Blomley, would you like to speak to the motion?
I just move the opposite recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Chong. Other speakers? In the absence of any discussion, I'll put the motion, which is recommending approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.4 is a subdivision application at 9 and 11 Bastic Street, Rosny, for a two-lot subdivision. Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Alderman Walker, thank you. Alderman Mulder, would you like to speak to it?
Most of the things I've said before, I've said about the other ones. Here we go, making lots of bits and pieces. Hands are tied. I don't know that I'd want to live in this or buy one of them, but then I'm not being asked to, or unfortunately, at this stage yet, I'm not being forced to. So.
Alderman Walker. Other speakers? I guess there's no need for a right reply there, Alderman Mulder, unless you had new material you want to interject.
Well, since the precedent's been set.
I'll put the motion then for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. That concludes our business as a planning authority. Thank you. There's nothing under customer service, asset management, financial management. Moving on to governance. 11.7.1 is the Cambridge Primary School lease of public land. Alderman Bumberto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You'll find that there's been an addition to the officer's recommendation circulated to you under my name. And
sorry, do we have a seconder there, please? Thank you, Alderman Warren.
yes, yep, that's it. And so the additions have come about from our deliberations and discussion at the council meeting briefing on Friday, and the additions are actually noted in red. So in Part A, it's actually giving a little bit more information, noting that there was 6 objections and 32 submissions. For the proposal, and also the important one is Part C, that the Department of Education is requested to give consideration to the leased area being utilised for the school sporting and recreation facilities, including a gymnasium, and that such facilities be available for community use outside of normal school hours. There was also another consideration that I believe was brought up by Alderman Pearce in relation to the period of the lease. As you'll see in Part A, it's actually up to 99 years. In discussing it at the council meeting briefing, and also having subsequently discussed it with the General Manager, the long and the short of it is if this particular piece of land actually is no longer to be used by the school, then the lease would actually be finished as such. So it would no longer be in this form, the lease. So I think, I'm sure that Alderman Pearce, when it gets to his turn to speak, will actually bring that up, but it didn't seem to be an issue as far as the majority of aldermen were concerned at the council meeting briefing, and albeit I realise that you were not at the briefing, and but the majority of the aldermen were. So as far as the land that is being leased, there's some fairly clear parameters in Part B as to the leasing of the land, which we're all familiar with. So I actually put it to the Alderman to actually support the changes to the recommendation. Thank you.
There was certainly some lively discussion on this. I note the point at the end of this motion about the land not being able to be used for any other purpose without the consent of the representation of the original requester. And I understood from that meeting that there, perhaps through you, Mr Mayor, the General Manager can confirm that there wasn't such a family member still available.
Through Mr Mayor, I understand there are relatives, but I understand that they're not legally the successors at law, if I can call it that, to agree to the change of the covenant, hence, not covenant, the condition of transfer, hence that power would revert to council, was the legal advice we've had.
Thank you. And so on that basis, I think it's important that we try to honour the original intention of the bequest, which was a sport and recreation facility. And I think that this particular piece of land, which I've had a look at, is not usable at the moment. It's behind a very seedy toilet block that I wouldn't go into when my son played soccer there. And so I think that it's actually a benefit to the organisation to have a new toilet block. And if we have a recommendation that the leased land is used for sporting and recreation facilities that benefit the community, I think that's well in keeping with the original intention of the bequest, and I support this.
James.
Yes, look, it's interesting, and I just would like to correct Alderman von Berto on a couple of matters, because I attended the briefing on Friday, and at that time there was some discussion. I actually prompted and took the Mayor on, if you recall, Mr Mayor, in relation to your stand on this, because you've been...
How could I forget, Alderman James?
That's right, and you've been basically opposed to this from day one, as you know. But anyway, look, there wasn't the detail under Part C in red that Alderman von Berto has referred to. That was not brought out at that meeting, and the first glimpse that I received in relation to this was today. It wasn't circulated over the weekend, and it's just come out of left field, and it wasn't discussed, Alderman von Berto, to the extent to which you have said. Now, having said that, I suppose that we're after a majority decision here, and that will probably put the Mayor's decision in relation to opposition to this particular matter to bed, because I'm going to support this clause here, because I want to make sure this thing gets up and make sure that the Mayor is well aware that the majority, I believe, of the Council is supportive of this, contrary to what your view has been over time, and particularly in the last few years. The interesting thing about Part C is that the Department of Education is requested to give consideration. As far as consideration is concerned, they may do, but at the end of the day, if they have their 99-year lease, they can go and tell council, go fly a kite. Absolutely, because we have no way in which to say that those particular matters in relation to the leased area being utilised for school sporting and recreation facilities be locked in, cut in concrete or basically to happen. It cannot happen. And therefore, by putting in this wishy-washy clause, okay, I'll support it, because at the end of the day, the Department of the Education are going to put $8 million into this. It's going to be a shared facility between council and the community, and even the community, the school committee, has come out in support of this. We've had meetings on site over the last two or 3 years, and the fact of the matter is the majority of the people in the community are in favour of this. We've already, Mr Mayor, had a joint undertaking with the Clarence High School. That's been a tremendous program with them. Also at the Geilston Bay High School, and then now down at Bayview, whatever it's called, Bayview School, and that we are about to embark upon that. So, heck, what's the difference between this particular matter, where in this particular case, council is basically giving support or providing a lease, and the Department of Education and the wonderful community, including the school, is about to inject taxpayers' money into this wonderful program. It's about time we tick off on it, and I believe this will get up. And even though I think this is a wishy-washy comment in Part C, I'll vote for it, because at the end of the day, we need a majority of this council, and I, for one, would not like to jeopardise this, and being if there is someone else in here that may decide not to vote according to this, then in fact, then we may not have our majority. I seek council support.
Thank you,
Alderman Mulder.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I thank you for the extra bits of clarification. Sometimes with these things we seem to forget. We're out here representing our community. So is the state government, so is the federal government, and it's all the same people. And they don't particularly care which level of government their money is laundered through. They just want to see some results from it. So this argy-bargy about who should use it, there is a great case for our schools, including lots of other government services that are delivered at the local level, at the community level. You can see police stations, fire stations, medical centres, all those things being delivered from single sites like that. That is a different debate. This one here, I'm totally supportive of this school needing to expand. It desperately needs to expand. The development that's going on in those areas, the number of enrolments that they get from outside that area, mind you, because of its reputation and the great way that it's been run. One of the things that was raised on Friday that I thought, Mr Mayor, would be in the amendments that Alderman von Berto had put forward, which I believe you have encouraged. There was something missing, and perhaps it'd be suffice to have an assurance from you that a standard condition on the lease will be that should it cease to operate as an educational facility, it will be, the lease will expire at that particular point in time, which I think is a great way of safeguarding the potential use for the Education Department to go off on a jolly of their own or do something else. So if that sort of assurance would be given, I would be even more supportive of this proposal.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I did give an undertaking at the briefing on Friday that in terms of my finalisation of the negotiation of the lease with the department, I will be insisting upon a reversionary clause that at the point in time when it ceased being used as a school, that the lease lapses and lease is cancelled rather and reverts to council.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, can I just raise some points on point C, and I'll explain why I wasn't happy with the 99-year lease, but it does say the Education Department is requested to give consideration to the lease to have been utilised for school, sporting and recreation facilities, which I totally agree with. But we're just asking them to consider it because really, if they're not going to put it there, I wouldn't vote for it, because you've got to remember, this is not the Education Department's first go at leasing land. They've already leased land off us. This is their second bite of the cherry. Now, on these documents that they gave us some time ago, there is a gym there. All we're asking them to do is relocate it, which I think is fair and reasonable. I mean, the additional piece of land they want, now this is the Education Department saying this, relies on an increase of land to be leased from council increases by approximately 50%. So the lease part they've already got, plus the lease part they're asking for, will be an additional 50%. Second time round. Now, let's just remember, I know it's a long time ago, but the school was there, the Maxwell family gave that land to the council or whoever in those days to administer it. They could have given it to the school. They didn't give it to the school. They said, use it for whatever, recreation facilities. And we've done that. And I'm really disappointed if they won't put those facilities on the lease part of land, and I think it's in the report, that people can use it after school hours. I think that's fair and reasonable, because other than that, I wouldn't be supporting 99-year lease. I think it stinks. But if they do that, I think, well, fair enough, they've done the right thing. And as we've heard, if it stops, well, it reverts back to council, so it doesn't matter, you know, whatever the ground is. But one thing that does annoy me a little, I haven't heard the Education Department say, you know, we're going to get this land, this will take us to, I think they said 2030 at the meeting. They haven't said, well, look, we're going to look for another school, or we're going to buy some land in Richmond Road and we'll go that way. They've given no indication what their plan is, and that's really disappointing, really disappointing. So at the moment, I'm prepared to help the school. I won't be here when they come up in 2030 and say whatever, but, you know, I just think they would tell us what their intentions are. They've got plenty of time to do it. They had plenty of time to do it before they came back and asked us for more land, and they still haven't done it.
Just your last 4 years on
Alderman James, please, you've had your say, and we need to move around. Any other speakers? Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I wasn't going to necessarily talk on this one tonight, but I think it's important that I do, and I'd like to start by congratulating Alderman von Berto on her motion tonight. It represents her impressive legal skills and expertise, and her, as well as her strong record of solid community engagement, so that we've now had before us tonight a motion that is a win-win situation, for not only the students of the primary school and the community, and the wider community of Clarence as well. Alderman Alberto, I congratulate you and I thank you very much for listening to what the will of the colleagues at our Friday briefing, and I disagree entirely with what Alderman James Alderman James had to say, because my recollection of that discussion was totally different to his. This is a significant investment. We can't be directing the Department of Education necessarily what to be doing. I am confident in my discussions with not only members of the community but also those in state government that this will go some way to ensuring that the people of Clarence are well catered for, and particularly the students. The growing student population of that wonderful school, Cambridge Primary School. So therefore I'm very happy, Mr Mayor, to support this motion.
Bring on the Pembroke election.
Other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
Pembroke. It's in Richmond.
Order.
Just very quickly, I support the motion. I'd just like to make a comment on community engagement, that we were able to get 90 people out into a hall, yet when you start to do a bit of legwork about the proposal, people didn't know this was coming up on Monday. I just make a general suggestion that perhaps we take an RSVP list of people who'd like follow-up from the council when this sort of stuff, if we go to the effort to make the public meeting, perhaps we could give a cursory contact that the thing that you were able to come out on a Monday night or whatever night it was for, we're going to follow that up and decide on it. Would you like to watch or come along?
Other speakers. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To cut to the chase, I am going to support this. On ideological purity grounds, I might not, but this requires an absolute majority, and we can't slow this down any further. This council's slowed this down so much, and the poker game of how everyone's going to vote, we don't actually see the show of hands until the vote goes up. Yeah. So that's where I am. Now, I want to note Alderman James and the way that he's sort of viewed this matter, because we rarely see eye to eye, but when it comes to this primary school over the years, we have. Our voting records show right from the get-go we were trying to back this growing community, because it's not the school, it's the place where the sons and daughters of Clarence residents and ratepayers are sending their children here. It's part of the community, and sometimes it's been decoupled from that. It's the oval, and people haven't realised that the people that go to the school are actually our community, and I don't know that they've had a great level of support through this process. It's taken a lot longer than it should have for that school to be able to get some certainty, and certainty is very close to happening. So on that basis, I will be supporting. Just a couple of points. Out of area people are knocking on the door to come to this school, and I am a huge supporter of school choice. However, the door's pretty much closed because it's not unfettered, and the demand is so big that the school cannot accommodate any out of areas. I am, as I said, when I was talking about why I might not support it tonight, it does come around to this red point, because I think it's pretty poor form to be adding this in so late in the piece. I haven't had the opportunity to speak to the school principal, and I didn't manage to make contact with P&F today to get their view on the matter. There is some degree around the fact that it's bright red as it is, it's just a piece of red garnish. It can be treated that way. But this is not an ideal way to carry this out, and I would have hoped that we'd have more time to have engaged with such people. So it does require an absolute majority. It's overwhelmingly a good thing. I'll be supporting this because we need to progress it.
Thank you. Case right reply, Alderman von Better. In that case, the motion before the chair is the officer's recommendation with a new subpara C and a slight modification to A. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to Alderman's question time. There are no questions on notice or answers to questions on notice. However, there is a couple answers to previous questions taken on notice. GM, do you want to address them?
No, as they're printed in the agenda there, Mr Mayor.
Are there any questions without notice? So starting with Alderman Muller.
Mayor, as per your previous directions, I will restrict myself to 2, with 47 subparts.
They're not my directions, Alderman Mulder. They're actually meeting procedures, regulations.
So my first question relates to the Urban Drainage Act of 2013, which requires councils to provide effective public stormwater. It also says that such stormwater plans must be developed for each urban area within 6 years of proclamation of the Act, which expires on the 19th of December this year. So my question is, how are we going with the plans, particularly in regard to Lauderdale? When will works start?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we actually held a meeting actually on the Urban Drainage Act, but our staff as to where we are at the moment. The storm management plans currently with consultants with Bell Reed and Hindustan North, Clarence Plains, and flood maps and risk management plans in terms of identifying for those areas. From my staff, I understand that will be complete in a very young time.
Thank you. Alderman second question?
My other question relates specifically to the Risdon Vale Neighbourhood Centre, who have been conducting for some time a program of outpainting graffiti on the fences around the parks. This, of course, it's not only done by them, it's also coordinated by groups such as the Richmond Christian Fellowship, and they're engaging some of the taggers in the area to engage in what is described as urban art. We won't go into what varying definitions of art might be, but...
I could encourage a question, please, Alderman.
Without the context, Mr Mayor, the question is that in July you wrote to the Risdon Vale Neighbourhood Centre ordering them to desist from overpainting graffiti under the risk of prosecution. My question, Mr Mayor, is why do we not assist this community who are only helping themselves instead of getting in the road?
Through Mr Mayor, look, I know just enough to be dangerous in respect of this. I am aware that there's some complexity in relation to this matter. Perhaps if I could take it on notice, and I will provide make sure you get provided with a detailed answer. But I am aware that we have asked them to desist from the work they were undertaking. I don't know enough detail to know what the scope or breadth of that work was, or particularly why, but I know that that request was made. But I will provide a full answer in due course.
Thanks, Alderman Moller. Alderman Kennedy. Any questions? Alderman Walker?
Yes, indeed, Mr Mayor. I note in papers that are circulated that this month Council, and probably this weekend coming, Council is expected to advertise the tender for the South Arm Skate Park. On that assumption, it would seem that this is going to occur before we discuss with Council about what the actual anticipated increased costs are from the original budget decision.
Through Mr Mayor, that would, Ross might correct me if I get this wrong, but it's a design and construct tender in terms of, and the available funds are identified, so it's designing and constructing to a specified amount. If we don't get tenders that comply with that, we would then come back to Council for further discussion.
On a point of clarification rather than my second question, it would seem that once you advertise a tender and you get receipts for a tender, the ball's rolling, you don't suddenly stop and say, actually no.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, in essence, I agree with you, but there are on occasions where if the submissions or tenders we receive aren't in accordance with expected outcomes, that you draw breath and reconsider the scope and breadth of what's being tendered for. I think that's correct, isn't it, Mr Graham?
That is correct, Mr Chairman.
Second question?
Yeah, look, just in relation to Bellary Beach Park that came up in a public deputation tonight, just inquiring, presently, whilst the park has been greatly enjoyed, there is still the tarmac interface between the playground and grassed area and the beach. Do we have an anticipated time frame in mind when we think this will be non-tarmac, but actually landscape?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll provide a briefing update to the
Do we have any approximate time frames, though, Ross?
No, we don't have. No, I mean, this financial year, in a couple of months, we'll be putting irrigation in the grassed area between the park and once the arena. So in terms of design outcomes, and we are this current year we're replacing the landscaping near the gym or the actual subsurface. But in terms of the rest, I'll need to provide an update.
I seem to recall that originally this phase of the project was going to start early last year. There seems to be a pretty major slippage on this beachside development of the park. Are you able to expand on that?
Through Mr Mayor, the main issue has been in terms of actually coming to grips with the design of the seawall as you approach the beach. It is expensive construction, but we need to get the height of that right in terms of water ingress, or in terms of WRL reports and everything, make sure we've got that right, because that sets the surface levels for the rest of we go back. So I think there's out for quotations at the moment, proposing design consultants for the seawall part, so we get that part right.
That could be included in the update, please. Thanks. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. A bit of a question on from Alderman Edmondson. Can we, with our website in our newsletter, ask people to add it to their favourites? A lot of people do say they don't know when this is happening and this is happening. All they have to do is quite often look on our website. So can we actually put that in our newsletter to say, please add that to your favourites, or something along that wording?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I believe that's been done in probably several editions of the newsletter over the last 12 months.
No,
and we also had a separate, when the rates went out last year, we had a flyer in it encouraging people to link to our social media networks.
No, but I'm just saying now, I think the page is much better. Can
we do it on a regular basis through the newsletter.
Obviously it was a good idea. Alderman Blomley. Alderman Evans.
Yeah, I have two. First one is a bit of a follow-up to Alderman Walker's question about the Belrive Park track. In the plan, that's the question through you, Mr Mayor. In the plans for that asphalted area, is there any traffic mitigation plans? I was there the other day and 2 motorbikes flew past, which is not a really good thing to have happen when there's 3-year-olds running around, albeit fenced.
In a position.
I don't know specifically in terms of the master plan, but I'll take that notice and address that in the briefing as well. We do have a foreshore pathway through there, which we linkage bikes and some of the motorbikes.
Sure. Yeah. Second question.
Second question, apologies, could have just put this one on notice, but I missed the 7 days. I was just wondering if I could get some data on the number of council staff and the number and the percentage of them who live in our council area, if that's possible to get our hands on, if it's not breaching anyone's privacy.
I can certainly tell you the number of council staff. I probably don't. I'll give some thought to the second part of the question, if you don't mind.
Yeah. My first question is, how and when is Council going to take corrective action in relation to the adjacent stormwater infrastructure to stop, or at least lessen the likelihood of a repeat of the serious flooding that occurred at 3 South Street and neighbouring properties on the 16th of December 2018?
Through Mr Mayor, there's a number of, we've had the 10th of May and the 16th of December storms last year, and we're looking at coming to council at its budget session on how we can deliver outcomes for some of these. There's no way we'll be able to do all these. I haven't got a specific time frame in terms of the one on 3 South Street. It's something that was raised today with council staff and myself in terms of us meeting the owner, myself and other software engineers to explain the process of where to. I will provide
I've requested a mayoral response being prepared, which I'll circulate to all concerned.
And my second question actually relates to the same topic, but a bigger picture perspective, and relates very much to Alderman Moulder's question. My question is, are the stormwater management plans required under the Urban Drainage Act 2013 that are currently being prepared by the staff going to be the subject of the 2019-20 budget deliberations?
There's a few parts to that in a sense. They are actually flood maps and they're risk management plans in terms of it. They won't deliver final outcomes, but they'll identify to council where the areas of risk to help council in the future direct where its funds should go to address flood-prone areas.
Okay, so in essence, that's a no?
Sorry, I'm going to answer it definitely. It'll be a yes for sure,
right?
Because in each of the last 2 or 3 years, we've been allocating significant sums of money to undertake these drainage studies. I would expect that the next few budgets will be there will be significant funds required to firstly complete the studies, and secondly then to start implementing the works that the studies identify need to be done. I think one important thing that we need to bear in mind when we're considering about this, and Ross will again correct me if I get this slightly wrong, but in my time in local government, which is far too long, like 42 years, what the actual engineering standards for a 1 in 20 year storm have increased dramatically over that period of time, i.e. what was needed 40 years ago, the size of pipe that was needed for a 1 in 20 year storm for any particular catchment is a significantly smaller pipe than what is required under a 1 in 20 year storm if we're designing to current modern standards.
That is correct, Mr Mayor. And as well, even they issued Australian rainfall runoff about 5 or 6 years ago, then reissued it again recently, and in that they're even saying 2100 it should be 20% more. We are actually requiring subdivisions to be designed for 20% more than current standards, and to allow for 1 in 100 year flood zones, so that the excessive rains has an outlet. All the old subdivisions now have a 1 in 100 arrangement as to where the water would actually be collected.
Can I express it slightly differently? 30 or 40 years ago, when a lot of these subdivisions were built, the standard we designed to for a 1 in 20 year storm is now really about the standard of what we accept for about a 1 in 5 year storm.
Alderman Jones.
Two questions. Firstly, my question to Mr Lovell in his capacity as Manager of City Planning. Mr Lovell, have you exercised a discretion in including in the Council's agenda and the Officer's report only some acceptable solutions, whether they comply or not, in order to provide only a breakdown of those identifiable solutions, acceptable solutions, against the performance criteria? I refer to page 45 of the Yachtsman Way matter, and on page 45 you say that the proposed development has been designed to meet acceptable solutions for privacy of the scheme in relation to the windows, etc., under clause 10.4.6. The issue therefore has no determining weight. Could you answer? Because prior to Christmas there was some discussion at officer level that there was going to be a revamp as to whether or not the list of acceptable solutions would be included in its entirety, as we have had, and has that discretion now been exercised by yourself?
Through you, Mr Mayor, what we're doing and what we've done for several years is to reference all of the acceptable solutions for which there's a corresponding performance criteria that's going to be discussed in the report. In other words, all acceptable solutions that are met are not reported on. We simply say at the start of the report that it complies with all acceptable solutions except for the following. Now, we talked earlier on, late last year about changing the format to concentrate more on identifying just the particular performance criteria in question, but we haven't made that change at this point in time. We're drafting our reports the same way as we did 7 years.
Just on supplementary on page 45, it does state that the acceptable solution was not provided in the report, but there are sort of contingencies that are associated with the privacy and overshadowing, which can in fact implement or even impact. So why wasn't it included?
Mr Mayor, I can't put it in more, I guess, plainly. That proposal complied with the relevant acceptable solution, and therefore the acceptable solution wasn't printed in full. And that's what we've been doing for some years.
All right, perhaps we can get further clarification on this after the meeting, Alderman Jones.
The second question is in relation to a Hunter development in the hotel on the foreshore. I'm advised that Hunter Development will be seeking a minor alteration to the approved plans, and that may entail a variation to the DA, and also it may be a matter under section 56 of LUPA for the council to make a decision. And Mr Lovell explained to my colleagues the difference between what is a major change or a minor change, in as much as that I believe one, if it's major, goes to council for consideration, and if it's minor, therefore it goes to, it's handled internally by the officers. And I
Alderman James, just as a procedural thing here, I mean, it's fair enough for you to ask questions for your own information, but there's no need for you to ask information for your colleagues.
Okay.
So, if you're seeking this, please
I'll
bear with me.
I'll retract that and just ask for my purposes if you would clarify what the difference is between a major and a minor under Section 56 of LUPA.
Thank you, Alderman James. Good clarification.
There were two parts of the question. The first was about the possibility of a minor amendment to the development in question, and we have received no such request. So we normally have to discuss things that may be discussed, but on this occasion I think it's fair to say we have not been approached any discussions with the applicants about a possible minor amendment. However, just in relation to the principle of minor amendments, I think it's Section 56 of the Act allows for minor amendments to planning permits, and there are a series of tests that we have to consider when we look at those. The principal ones being around whether or not the nature of the minor of the amendment changes the nature of the use or development that's been approved, and therefore normally when we say minor amendments we literally mean minor amendments.
Just calling to mind the ceremony in November where we were all sworn in, and your indication that you wanted parents to be the model for consultation with the community. For my purposes, could you please clarify what is the process for alerting stakeholders when there's a development application, and when that development application will be heard by council? Because I understand that the residents in Anchorage Way, Anchorage Court, only found out that there was a proposal on their neighbouring properties when they were out walking their dog, and they were not informed, despite the fact that they had made representations, that the meeting would be addressing that DA tonight. So can I find somewhere guidelines on how we go about communicating with our stakeholders in a timely manner to make sure that they're fully informed?
We write to the representative, acknowledging representation, and we advise that the decision, council will make the decision and they'll be advised of the outcome in due course. We don't advise of the date of the meeting.
That's existing policy, Alderman Warren.
Supplementary question, is that something that's within our power to change?
Of course.
So it's not written in stone. So
no,
that's something we could address, because I am receiving a lot of angst from residents who find that despite having made a representation, they do not receive the information in a timely way in order for them to attend the meeting.
One of the dilemmas with that is the is the fact that we generally don't set the agenda. It's not finalised until 4 or 5 days before the council meeting. If we seek to write out to people and to inform them, they don't get the letters before. Once the decision's made and items on the agenda, they don't get it beforehand. To advise them electronically is not only a percentage of people actually advise their email address. To ring them is a very onerous task, particularly when in some instances there might be 50 or 60 representations. So I understand your point. It's certainly something that council will obviously want to discuss when we consider some amendments to our consultation policy, but it's not just simple of letting people know immediately once the decision's made.
Look, I understand the point you make as well, and I think we should raise it as part of communication strategy. Second question, yes.
Blunston Arena noise levels. Can I ask the General Manager through you, Mr Mayor, was there any follow-up to the unacceptable noise levels just before Christmas?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I haven't yet received a noise report in relation to that. I would expect that will be followed up over the next week or so. Whilst you've used the term unacceptable noise, I do understand that we got complaints, but I don't know whether the noise levels were unacceptable in the sense that they were outside of the permit conditions. The dilemma with this is that we, as a council, served or established an environment protection notice and served it on Blunston Arena. They, on Cricket Tasmania I should say, in relation to their usage of Blunston Arena. They appealed that to the Planning Appeals Tribunal. The Planning Appeals Tribunal then took it upon themselves to put that appeal of the Environment Protection Notice on hold pending the consideration of the development application that Cricket Tasmania submitted. We refused that development application. They've subsequently exercised their right to appeal that to the Planning Appeals Tribunal. So both matters at the moment are on hold. Now, are going through the Planning Appeals Tribunal process. One of the reasons we took it upon Council decided to serve the Environment Protection Notice is because of the plethora of varying noise measures that have been established through the 7 or 8 permits that exist in respect of Blunston Arena, and trying to consolidate it into one sensible, achievable and practical outcome. That hasn't been resolved as yet. I don't have a report in respect of those the actual recent performance that you're referring to, but I would expect to get it in the next couple of weeks.
Perhaps we're going to be advised the outcome?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the close of the open session of Council's meeting tonight. So can I thank the members of the audience who have lasted the distance. We do need to go into closed session to deal with a couple of confidential items. Thank you very much. I have a motion accordingly, please. Thanks to Alderman Pearce. Second to Alderman Chong, thank you. Procedural motion that we go into closed session. All those in favour? Against? Carried.